Damian and Ellen, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
The king and queen of ice cream, Morelli's, the institution of Northern Ireland.
Queen.
People think ice cream, they think Morelli's. How exciting.
Yeah, well, it's been there a long time. So I'm fourth generation now.
Wow.
And we've been trading in Portstewart since 1927 and on the North Coast since 1911. So there's a lot of history there.
A lot of history, and I'm looking forward to getting into it. I have to say before we get started, I'm really excited for today because I automatically have a lot of respect for you guys. So business aside, we had the chance to sit down with your Francesca, your daughter, a year ago, and she spoke very, very highly of her parents. And I'm just like a new dad, right? So I've got like a 2-year-old girl and I've got another girl on the way. And I'm like, if my daughter makes it to Francesca's age and she speaks highly of me, I think that's the greatest success you could ever have. So fair play.
Yeah, well, we're very proud of all
that's
three of
nice.
them now, so that's good to hear.
How did you guys meet, or what was your kind of family background?
We met whenever I was at university here. In my start of my second year, I was out in the University of Ulster Jordanstown campus, and Ellen was nursing in the city. And I crashed my car. I had a car, but I crashed it into a wall trying to do an unsuccessful handbrake turn. And so I was without my car for several weeks while it was getting repaired. So a friend of mine who I studied with, a guy called Pete McGuigan, who transpired was a very close friend of Ellen's, gave me a lift into Belfast one night, and I took him into the Egg to get him a drink to say thanks, and I met Ellen that
I was
night.
there.
Wow.
You were thinking there with this car crash that I nursed him back to health. That kind of.
It would have been a great story. I'm not going to lie.
I think that'll be a better one. It'll be more romantic.
Whenever you
but
write
yeah.
the highly fictitious biography, that would be a good angle to go down.
That's
You'd
the
sell
one,
more
yeah.
books, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
You would.
Yeah.
You would.
So
It's more
meeting in a
dramatic.
pub, it ain't that exciting, really. But
So before meeting, had you been to Morelli's?
no, I had no idea of the existence.
So
No.
it wasn't the massive family legacy name that drew you in.
No idea who anything. Grew up in Whitehead, and if I was to go anywhere locally within Northern Ireland to a sort of a resort, it probably would have been County Down, Newcastle or Bangor.
Yeah.
Never. Now, possibly once or twice up to the Northwest races, but no, it wasn't for ice cream. It was for Kelly's and fun. So no, had no idea about anything.
That's interesting.
So yeah, it was a wee bit of a culture shock.
You can tell them what your mother said.
No, that's rude.
What did your mother say?
Oh my goodness. Well, she got, I don't know. There's another family in Portrush, and they're Trefellis, and they have the amusements.
Yeah.
But their origins come originally from circus. So Mum had heard the name Morelli, Trefelli, and she said, Ellen, they're circus people. So she thought I would be on tightrope doing high rye.
Unbelievable.
So yeah, but she had her words when she met Damian and realised he wasn't so bad.
Just need to park that 1 wee second. I was having such a great time with the Morelli's that I totally forgot to do my intro, so I'll do it now really quickly before we jump back into it. This episode is brought to you by NI Connections, which is the diaspora program of Invest in I. They are all about connecting Northern Irish people around the world. They're all about helping people move back to Northern Ireland or move to Northern Ireland for the very first time, including you listening or watching. So if you would like to find out more about some of the other episodes that we've done in this series where we interview really interesting people who live overseas from Northern Ireland or who have moved to Northern Ireland, just like the Morelli family did many, many years ago to make Northern Ireland their home, I highly recommend going to niconnections.com, which is where you can sign up for their free email newsletter, be connected with a whole bunch of really interesting people, and see all of those practical, nitty-gritty little bits of information about what it actually would look like for you to move here, whether you're coming back home or it's your first time. niconnections.com, and thank you so much once again for making this episode possible. Big shout out to producer Mark as well, the fine gentleman who was sitting right here in this chair during the interview, for working the cameras and making the conversation so fun. And of course, big thanks to the Morellis, and thank you for listening. Cheers. How old were you whenever you started getting dragged in?
To work?
Yeah.
Oh, 10, 11, 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally would have sort of grown up behind the counter to some degree, because my father and mother were, like we are, very hands-on, and my grandmother before them. and she nearly lived behind the counter. She was, very, very hands-on. So, yeah, we all did our shares at weekends and in the summer and that.
So you said fourth generation.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the first. How did they
So it's
get to this weird and wonderful place?
Yeah, I mean, it's a simple story, and it's still happening today. It was basically lack of work. Where we're from in Italy is right in the centre in the Lazio region. It's a little mountain village, and during the turn of the century, really, there was no work there. It was all agriculture. So anybody really who was in their 20s left to go looking for work. And my grandfather was no different, and his great uncle, he was the first person who came here, Peter. And basically, some of them came to Ireland. A lot of the people from that valley, a lot of the Italians in Ireland actually are from that valley. It's called the Valley del Camino, which takes in several different, in fact, probably 20 or 30 different villages. Names like Cafala and Macari and those sorts they're all relatives of ours, and they all come from that region. Fusco, another one, that's a Belfast name as well. So, so they left looking in search of work. Some of them came to Ireland, some of them came to Scotland. A lot of them are still in Scotland. Some of our family went to Paris to become glassblowers, which was a trade that they seemed to embrace. When they came here, then they brought their knowledge of ice cream and that sort of thing, and they probably learned the fish and chip trade over here. But a lot of the big families in Dublin, that was their stock and trade as fish and chips. Chip barons they're known as over there, and it's weird for us because we see so many of them. We grew up with them whenever because I used to spend my summers there, and Francesca and my other kids spent their summers there, and they when they go back to Ireland, they live in these little grotty apartments and they work all the hours that God sends. But when they go back to Italy, they're living in these gorgeous big houses, and and they rent a lot of them actually rent their premises out for several months at a time, and then they go out there and just go back to their sort of roots. So
is a lot of your family still in Italy?
Yeah, a lot of family still there. Not very close family. My father, who was 91 last week and still going strong, thank God, he would spend kind of half the year there and half the year here. And we do have cousins and distant relatives there, but nobody really close. My brother is basically based there. He worked in Australia for 32 or 33 years, I think it was. He was a social worker. And he came back from Australia several years ago, and he kind of just stays with Dad and looks after Dad, him and his partner Sam. So we're very lucky to have him keeping an eye on Dad and making sure that he's okay. And when they go back to Italy, which they will do in about 3 weeks' time, he'll go with them and they'll stay out there and then probably till about October.
Brilliant. So this is a very naive question. Do you say it was like 1911?
1911, yeah.
So like no Ryanair flights.
No,
not exactly an easy way to get over. How did they get?
That's a good question, actually.
Well,
boats
from
and
what
cars
I can remember, I would listen to a lot of the stories, and a lot of them would have set off walking, and they would have started at sort of the middle of the summer, so they would have arrived in France at the time of the grape and the olive harvest. And then they could help out with that, and that would earn enough money and food for passage for the boat.
Nice.
And that would have taken weeks. And then when they arrived in Ireland, there would have been somebody who, a chipper in Belfast or somebody in Dublin, who would have looked after them, got them somewhere to stay, got them working almost immediately. And then if that all turned out, then the letter went back to Italy to say, we need more help. And it was started over again. And it was called chain immigration.
Nice.
It's just as simple as that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it hasn't really changed. I mean, if you look at the Indian population in Northern Ireland and the Chinese population in Northern Ireland, it's all similar.
It's all chain.
So that's how it all worked. They went over initially and then started to bring members of their family over and, survived and thrived.
Yeah.
So that's we were no different.
So I totally understand the pizza and Italian food angle. I totally understand the ice cream angle. I never got the fish and chip thing, but even chatting to I've had a few 90-year-olds on the podcast, and they were like, "Oh yeah, like fish and chips," and they just kept mentioning all these Italian families. I was like, "What's happening there?"
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's because when they arrived in Ireland, potatoes were plentiful and cheap, and so was fish. If you went down to the harbour, you could get a case of fish. So, and if you were living above the shop, then you weren't paying rent and rates. Well, you were to a certain extent, but it was all in the one. And if you were serving fish and chips, then you had food to eat upstairs as well. And it was all inexpensive. the supply was plentiful. And that's why, really.
It's
that
what
was the
people
beginning.
wanted as well.
Yes.
I mean, obviously on the coast, you know, anywhere in Ireland, fish and chips is traditional. Because I remember when my father was a younger man, it probably would have been in the early 70s, he opened a pizza takeaway in Coleraine, and nobody knew what a pizza was. Literally, they hadn't heard of a pizza, and it completely flopped because, as I say, people had never heard of it. And he actually brought a guy from Naples over to do the pizzas, and he created carnage up in the area, but we'll not go into that. But we were doing proper pizza from scratch, but it never worked because it was too ahead of its time. So and the coffee thing, I mean, Gadja are a brand of coffee machine which are still on the go to this day. I think they're based in Milan, and my grandfather was one of the very first people in Ireland to have a Gadja coffee machine.
Wow.
I wish we had it now, unfortunately, but it was a really ornate thing with all these gold sort of wavy patterns at the back of it. But he was one of the first, if not the first person to have one of those.
That's interesting. So you said Coleraine takeaway pizza shop, 1970s?
Very early 70s, and only Nicole was only a baby now, she's not much older than me, so I'd say 72, 73.
Do you know
possibly.
what it was called?
I don't know what it was
Because
called.
I tell you why I asked, because I don't know why. A few years ago, someone asked me the question, when did the first pizza come to Northern Ireland? And it was off the back of, I remember just having a conversation with my granny one day, and she was like, it wasn't necessarily this, but it was something like, oh yes, 84, first year I had a banana. And I was like, what? Like you were like in your 50s by the time you had a banana, and that concept to me, and of course, and then she was telling me, oh yes, I remember the age whenever I had pasta, whenever I had pineapple, and then someone asked me about pizza, and the closest I've got, and you've totally blown it out of the water, I think someone said to me Capers in East Belfast.
Yes, that would be right. It was one of my first.
But it was very hard to get a date for these things, but it was maybe like the 80s that was kind of popping up. So this is like really ahead of its time, and people didn't have a clue.
Yeah, well, Nicole, what age is Nicole? She's 50, must be my younger sister. Nicole would be about 52, something like that.
Yeah.
And she was a baby in arms whenever he opened it, so it was definitely early 70s. So
Wow.
So there you
I
go.
think same granny, she told a story recently where people were bringing pizza home in their suitcases whenever they were flying from Italy because they wanted people to, oh, you gotta taste this is really good. I just can't fathom that sort of world.
yeah, that it's relatively not that long ago, really, when you think about it in those terms.
Yeah. How did your family end up on the North Coast then? Because it's one thing to come into Belfast. How do you then make that additional trek up there?
I think my uncle Peter was the first person to come up north, and he started in Stone Row in Coleraine, which is right off the Diamond, and that was the first shop that we had up there. And then, same idea, he brought my grandfather over to help him, and then he opened a second shop in Portstewart, which is our current place, in the 20s, and it was called the Ice Palace. And my grandfather started to work there, and then they expanded into Portrush, and they had a site right on the corner at the bottom of Eglinton Street. And then when my grandfather went back home, married his childhood sweetheart, came back over again, then he saved up the money to buy the Portstewart store from my uncle Peter. He was an entrepreneur. You talked about entrepreneurs earlier, and he was very go-ahead guy, and he had a taxi company, and he had 2 or 3 different businesses on the go. So he was the one who really kicked it off for us, and so it was his idea to come to the North Coast because he could just see the potential of the seasonal seasonal business up there.
Yeah.
It's possible the Forte family might have.
Yeah, the Forte family is a connection as well.
Yeah.
They're,
and there was
they're in
also
Portrush.
a policy.
Who are they, or
whereby-
what are they?
Well, you remember Charles Forte, the hotels all
Oh,
over
yes,
the
yes,
world.
yes.
It's a connection with them, and they're all from the village. And there was a policy whereby if there was people from the village who were doing well in Dublin, other family members could come, but you didn't want to step on anybody's toes either, so you maybe went away a wee bit further, and you got word that yes, there could be a potential on the North Coast, and the 40s are doing well there, and you go there but went to the next town. You didn't want to be
That's interesting.
unless you were invited into the family itself. You were better to not
Because when the whole
be in
war
competition.
thing broke out, obviously in the middle of it all, Second World War, my grandfather was interned in the Isle of Man, and his one of the people in his block was Charles Forte, who was the founder of Trust House Forte Hotel Group, which is still on the go, but it's Rocco Forte's the son who runs that now. They've trimmed it all down. It's more luxury hotels now that they run, but they've got them all over the world. And they would have been related to the Forties who moved to Portrush, and they helped keep our business going whenever my grandfather was shipped off to Oman. He was there for 4 years, and my grandmother was left to run the business, and she didn't even speak English properly. So that was a very difficult time, and they were kind enough to help out and keep the thing going.
Another ignorant question: why was he interned?
Because he was an Italian citizen.
That's the only reason.
That's the only
Because they were
reason.
like Mussolini, and let's just get this guy out of here.
Yeah, he used to tell. He didn't talk much about it really, but we made a documentary in 2005 called A Family Portrait. It was a friend of my sister's who was a producer from. She'd actually done MTV in Canada, and she pitched this idea to the BBC, and they took it on board. And it was really well done. It was quite rock and roll in those days. That was 2005, I think it was made. And sorry, is that right? Yeah, 2005. And
Jimmy Nesbitt
narrated it as well.
Oh, class.
So you can get it. You get it on YouTube. It's still, a lot of people still watch it. As it was very interesting, and there was a lot of stuff talked about that I didn't even know. And so yeah, he was basically scooped from Portstewart by the local sergeant, who. And I always remember him telling the story that when the sergeant came to the door with tears in his eyes because he knew my grandfather. He knew he was no threat. But that was just the way it was. He had his bag packed and ready to go. And in fact, another interesting thing, diversifying a bit here, but we took a Crumlin Roads jail tour a couple of years ago. And whenever he was initially lifted from Portstewart, he was sent to Crumlin Road for 2 weeks before he was shipped off to the Isle of Man.
The boat only went every couple of weeks then, so we'd have to put him somewhere.
And Ellen said something at the time which really resonated with me, was that, because if you've done the tour, I don't know if you have or not, but you know the way the reception you go into, and there's all these little like cubicles all around with these open flappy doors. She said your grandfather would have been in one of those.
He would have had to strip off, put on jail clothes, like a common criminal.
Yeah. That's right, and get hosed down effectively.
And get photographed with his hands up. Because I'm sure you remember from the tour that was sometimes the identifying feature, because chances are you'd worked in a mill and you'd lost digits.
Interesting.
So this
you're identified by your lack of
how many
pinky.
fingers you had. So he would have had that photograph taken, and he was just making ice cream in Portstewart, minding his own
That's
business.
crazy. Have you ever done that tour?
No.
We should.
That's very
It's
good.
interesting. You should check it out. I don't know, like even just things like how small the cells were because people were so much shorter back in the day. Blows my mind.
I know. I don't think there were any shorter. I just think that's.
You
the way
think
it
that's
had
just
to
the way
be.
it was?
Yes, it
My
was
tour guide
just-
lied to me then.
Yeah, it was multiple people in a relatively small space, and they rammed them in, and maybe 4 to a cell.
And just on that topic, another interesting thing which it's worth watching the documentary just to see it, just because it's a good watch, not just because it's about us, but when my grandfather was eventually organised to be sent off to the Isle of Man, there was 2 queues. There was one going to the Isle of Man and there was one going to Canada on a boat called Indora Star, and there was a mix-up in the queues, and there was 2 Angelo Morelli's, and my grandfather had ended up in the queue to go to Canada. So he took him out of that line and put him on the boat to go to the Isle of Man. And then Indora Star was shot by U-boats, and everybody on board was killed.
Wow.
So twist of fate there.
So your grandfather didn't talk much about it, though, you said.
No, not really. He was a very emotional man, and you could see that in the documentary. It was just difficult for him to talk about it because my father and my uncle had been sent back to Italy to learn Italian and to stay with my great grandmother. Yeah, that's right. In our still to this day family home. And basically we live very close to Monte Cassino, which was the scene of a very famous battle during the war. And our house was Nazi headquarters. So basically the soldiers marched in and kicked everybody out. So they didn't see the boys for...
Was it 5 or 6 years?
Yeah, I can't remember what the time period was, but it was years anyway. So they didn't know where they were. They didn't know if they were alive or dead. And basically they made their way down from our house, which is say an hour south of Rome, right down to the Calabria, and there's a town there called Averso, I think it is, and they ended up in a misplaced persons camp. And by another weird twist of fate, the commandant of that camp was a guy from Portstewart.
No way.
Called Cunningham.
Mr. Cunningham. Yeah.
So he recognised the name, and then he was able to organise with
Like recognised the name because he had ice cream in Morelli's.
because So there was a guy, Salvetta, who was a friend of the family from our valley, and he was tasked with getting the boys back home, and he did. And so my uncle Crado and my dad landed back in Portstewart, and they were really, really skinny because they hadn't eaten anything, hadn't been eating properly for forever. And my uncle Guido, he was always a bit portly, shall we say, and he was there at home. He was the youngest one, so he hadn't been sent away. So it was like a big reunion. So yeah, we've got some great photographs of that up in the shop at the minute. So we went through and got all the old photographs gathered and put them all like on a wallpaper all over the place, so you can see lots of those photographs at that time. It was a difficult time for my grandfather because they didn't know where they were.
Yeah.
So and Dad would never ever talk about that.
Yeah. And then it's the transition from that, and it wasn't just your family, it was every family during those times, that then a year later you go back to making ice cream and being a plumber and being a school teacher and trying to reintegrate back into this new normal. We've heard that phrase a lot. It's crazy.
I think it wasn't plain sailing when he came back,
Sure.
because they were considered the enemy to some degree.
I was going to ask about any prejudice.
Yeah, there was. Again, it's not something. My grandfather's just not, and my father as well, not that sort of person. But they didn't bear any grudges. It was just the way it was. But there would have been a bit of prejudice at the time. Is probably the right way to put it. But obviously that's history now, and everybody's moved on. So
yeah, it's interesting. There's a plaque just down the road here on the 10 Square Hotel. One of those wee blue plaques.
Yeah.
We did a documentary about that guy. His name's Otto Jaffe. He's a German Jew.
Yes.
He was a Lord Mayor of Belfast twice, but he got booted out of the country, I think, when the First World War happened. Because again, it was just like the connect the dots. It's like, oh, he must be the enemy. He was accused of being a spy, and then just booted him out. It's crazy.
My grandmother, during that time when she was running the business alone and he was interned, she was arrested as well. She was brought inland. And the excuse was that she could be signalling U-boats out in the bay in Portstewart, and her, a wee tiny woman that size, who couldn't even speak English properly. But that was when the Forte stepped in and helped to run the business, because she wasn't allowed to be on the water, basically.
Wow.
So
shows you the level of paranoia as well that was around. Because I think it's like, I hear that and I immediately jump to, that's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
But then Lindsay was reflecting on even just like the COVID pandemic. And how quickly we can go there as a people from a zero calm to a 99% freak out moment. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, the whole COVID thing was awful. And to try and be in business through, not even just financially, just managing people's expectations and, the whole eat out, help out debacle.
It is laughable though. It's recent history, but I look back and I was even saying to my wife the other day, I was like, there's no way that actually happened. Like there's no actually like someone's inserted a spoof memory in my head because that just didn't happen. Crazy.
Yeah.
It's like a bad dream now.
Well, hopefully we're out the other end of that now.
When was the moment that you felt like, okay, we're finally bouncing back from this as a business? Because there's a lot of false starts, wasn't there?
In truth, we're still suffering from it. And that was my fault, because when we closed initially, there was significant government help in terms of, obviously your biggest thought, and every employer's biggest thought, is what I do with my staff. So the furlough thing kicked in quite quickly, and that was great. I mean, we got furloughed too because we're working directors. So that was great because that sorted that problem out. And then also there was grants available and these CBIS loans and all that sort of stuff. So it was all great. But then it didn't occur to me that because that happened in March, that's always our weakest point when we're coming out of the winter months and heading back into the season again in terms of cash flow. So I really underestimated the effect that was going to have. So when things really started to get back to normal, which has only really been now, maybe in the latter part of last year, all of a sudden I'm 2 years back from where I should be. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, that's a lot to do with COVID, and it really has. And I think a lot of people in our industry have realised they're playing catch up now.
Yeah.
And we'll probably never catch that up. Because to lose basically 2 seasons, and even the seasons that we had, it was one minute you were open as a takeaway and then you weren't allowed to open at all, and you were throwing stock out, and it was just an absolute nightmare. You know, I understand it was unprecedented and it's a very difficult thing to manage, and you know, the government were finding their feet, I suppose, to some degree too. But it's a big legacy still for us, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and you know, when the 5th and 6th generation come along, that will be part of the story.
Yeah.
You know, the same kind of wonder that you have in your eyes talking about the Andor Star nearly being shot. They'll be like, yeah, and then the pandemic happened, and like, can you believe that they weren't even allowed to sell ice cream? Like, what the heck was going on there? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's part of the legacy. So again, I have a lot of respect for you guys for making it through that, because plenty of businesses didn't, in your industry in particular.
Oh, it's been a struggle. It really has. You know, there's lots of struggles in business, and I know everybody's the same at the minute. But the cost of things, the cost of living thing, you know, obviously for anybody, any working guys or anybody in the world at the moment, but for businesses in particular, I mean, our costs have absolutely rocketed. Yeah. You know, electricity is, and the thing about, because we're a seasonal business, our electricity cost doesn't really change much in the winter, because it's all, if you're open, you need electricity. We need to run fridges and freezers and stuff. Our electricity bill has doubled. You know, and it's the same in the winter as it is in the summer. And in the summer it doesn't matter, because there's plenty of cash flow coming in, but in the winter time there isn't. I mean, it really isn't. We're treading water in the winter, and the gas has tripled. So I mean, unfortunately, you know, there's a lot of businesses, you know, both established and not established, who won't survive. Yeah. If this doesn't change.
Absolutely.
You know, and I know the war in Ukraine is probably the main reason for that. But I'm sure nobody thought that was going to last a year, and there's a year last week already.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm, number one, not in hospitality, so I can't really speak too much. Number two, mainly Belfast focused, so anything I do know hospitality is to do with the city. What's it like in terms of staff up in somewhere like a Portstewart? Are you facing the same challenges that we're facing down here?
Absolutely. We're recruiting at the minute. And what we're finding is that we used to get always, our workforce would be sort of 3/4 part-time and 1/4 full-time. And it was always students that made up the difference. But now, when we're advertising for staff, you know, you basically, if you can stand up straight and write your name, you're hired. but the profile of the people who are applying, it's 16-year-olds now who are coming in, and they're great actually. Sure. Because 15, 16-year-old, 17-year-old kids, they actually quite want to work, and they want to enjoy being paid, and we pay them, you know, a good wage. But sometimes we've found that the students just aren't applying anymore, which is tricky, because our school kids of that age, and they all leave in May to go and do exams and stuff, which is when you really need them, and then they're not allowed to do the same amount of hours that older kids would do. Yeah. We've always got by. This year is really going to be difficult, because you know, Easter's not that far away now, and we need about 10 more than we have at the minute, and we're just not getting the forms in through the door. Yeah. And the problem up there is there's so much competition now, particularly in Portstewart, and everybody's hiring, so they've got their pickup places to work.
Absolutely.
And a lot of
job.
Well, I think I can stand up. I'm pretty sure I can write my name.
I can make ice cream for sure.
Yeah. And I think the COVID thing was another.
I think it got people out of the way of working.
It did, and then they decided that they didn't want to do weekends, and they didn't want to do late hours, and it's very understandable. Hospitality is said on that questionnaire. It's not easy. Yeah, it's not easy. Gig. It is.
It's impressive that the business has lasted so long, and it will be interesting to see how you move through these next kind of set of hurdles. What was it like for you moving up to the North Coast?
Yeah, it was quite strange. I never really spent much time there, but Damian's family were all great. And I started, I'd been a staff nurse previously in City Hospital in Belfast, and I'd also been cabin crew for British Midland in the 80s. So I was used to centre for people. Yeah. Interested in people, I like people. So that bit was easy. And I'd worked in chippers and cafes, and, you know, as a Saturday girl, really from I was 13. So
for a Mars bar a week.
But so
is that true? It's not a joke. Yeah. You got paid in Mars bars.
Well, it was minimal wages. So yeah, that I didn't mind the work, and Portstewart, a lovely place, and just got on with it really. Yeah. And with some nice time off as well then, and which Damian promised. He said, look, it is hard work and you'll be fine, but the winter's nice, and we'll get our holiday in September, and you know, and he was to his word.
Yeah.
And
Ellen's very good in the shop, in fairness now, and she would be very good at, be busy and just, where's she gone? We're pretty busy. What's she doing now? But she would be sitting down talking to people and gleaning their whole life story from them, and people really like that. And that's a real skill. I don't possess it really. I wouldn't have the patience, but Ellen will just love sitting chatting to people and seeing what their story is and where they're from, especially if they're from somewhere a bit different. So no, she's very good that way, and I was always a hard worker. So we've made a good team over the years. So
you've got a great mind for stories. Like, that's clear. Like you're just good at collecting that sort of information.
Some people would call it nosy.
Hey, you got to use the superpowers you've been given, don't you?
Well, my mum always said, to be interesting, you have to be interested.
Hey,
that's a great quote.
That's good.
You said you were nursing before
Yeah.
ice cream.
Yeah.
Did you ever think of going back to that?
Well, actually, many years ago, now how many years? Let me see, Nino's 20.
2000.
So we knocked down the whole MORELLI'S building and rebuilt it. So we knew, despite everything builders told us, it was going to be a year. So Damian had to make lots of journeys to Italy to look at different types of counter arrangements and marble and things like that. And to all intents and purposes, I was off. I had 2 little girls at this point. And I was looking after them, but I thought, well, I'm also slightly redundant. So at that point, there was talk of some sort of mad bird flu coming into Northern Ireland, and there was an opportunity to do the return to nursing course, which I did in the University of Ulster.
Nice.
And it should have been 3 or 4 months, but they condensed it all into 1 month. And I worked up in the Coleraine Hospital, and it was very, very different from the nursing that I had done. And enjoyed it, but it was quite different. And so that was my return. And then I proceeded to have my 3rd child, Nino, who's now 20. And then the shop reopened, and I never really looked back. Having said that, when there was word of COVID, I phoned the hospital in Coleraine and said, put me in the bank, I'll come in. And at this point, we didn't know the horrors. And on one day, at home, the shop had closed. About a week later, the phone went, and it was a number of the hospital, and I couldn't answer the phone because I was flat on my back with COVID.
Oh, you were an early adopter, were you?
I was. And in fact, I didn't even know I
Ahead
had
of the
it or
curve.
anything. I like to be set a trend all night. And didn't even know I had it, but I kind of knew I wasn't. I couldn't even answer the phone. I couldn't even lift the phone, and. So then I thought, when I'm better, I'll have antibodies and I'll be fit to be that person. Sure. But then I heard that a lot of these people that were going back into the industry were having to stay in the local hotel. They couldn't go home to their families. And the high level of bacteria that they were having to face, there was quite a few people getting sick. And I had to have a step back and think, I owe it to my family to be alive, safe, and with them. So that was a decision I made. And I stayed at home during COVID then after that. So in a way, it was quite fortuitous that I had time to think about that one.
Absolutely. And I mean, the working conditions that we don't even need to go into, they were horrific.
Yes, and I'm not sure I could have
13 hours with not just a normal flimsy mask, but like a proper effectively a gas mask. It's not easy.
People, very, very sick people. Have been very traumatic. More traumatic for the sick people, but
of course. It's tough. We've seen a lot of nurses fall out the other end of it as well. You know, they're having a staff issue as well off the back of everything too. How do you guys manage stress in your life? Because we all have it. Business owners especially have it. There's obviously family stuff that goes on in everybody's life. There's interpersonal things. How do you take that stress? What do you do with it?
Well, because we both work together, we have time apart, and we live in a mid-century bungalow, which is kind of very long and thin. So Damian can be watching TV in one room, and I can be in the other end of the house.
I love that. That kind of
we
sounds
just phone
ideal.
each other occasionally. Bring us a cup of tea. So we can have time apart, and then Damian goes off on his motorbike. He plays golf, bit of a karate man.
Not just a bit of a karate man. Come on, Mark.
What other hobbies? You're quite.
We were looking through the things you'd sent over before, and it was kind of like, a list of hobbies that I was like, yeah, that makes sense, and then black belt in karate. I was like, how did that happen? How'd you get into that?
It was always an interest of mine, and I started to train with a guy called Joe McCulloch. Oh goodness, we weren't long.
30 years
were
ago.
Even married. It was 30 odd years ago, and I trained with him kind of one-on-one, and then joined the university club, and I did about 2 years with him, and I got up to about, I think it was about green belt, and then for some reason I just packed it in. But one of the guys that started with me, actually the same night, started with me, Terry Geddes, he kept going, and he eventually formed his own club and several other clubs. So Terry, his day job was he used to deliver flyers out for businesses, and he always was coming into the shop delivering flyers, and he would say to me, would you not come back? Would you not come back? So eventually one day I thought, okay, well, I'd like Nino to try it. So he was only, I don't know, 7 or 8 maybe at the time. So I said, look, come on, we'll go back and give it another go. And you can't just walk back in at green belt, you've got to go back to start again until you reach that standard.
Oh, interesting.
Because every belt is a grade. Basically it's an exam, so you need to know a set amount of stuff to pass that grade to move on to the next stage. So him and I trained together, and he got up to green as well. He might have got actually purple, I think. Maybe he got up to. But anyway, and he was really good. He was quite tall, and he was a great build for it. But unfortunately, he didn't stick it out. They do lose, apparently if 10,000 people start training in karate, one of them will get a black belt. Eventually, there's a big fallout rate. And traditional karate that I studied was very formal. It's not like the UFC stuff where it's it's a bit more
fast and loose.
Fast and loose is the right way. Yeah, I mean I totally respect them as well, obviously, but ours is very formal, very structured, great discipline for kids and stuff. But some of them get bored because it's very repetitive, and there's actually not a lot of contact in it really until you start to get higher up the belts and start to do courses and gradings and stuff like that. So anyway, I came back now. He dropped out, but I kept going and trained with Terry, and then went for black belt, failed it miserably, and had to do it again. And they only have one black belt grading a year in Ireland, or is it 2? Maybe 2. So I missed the boat for that one anyway. So I had to go off and do it in Scotland. So passed it in Scotland. It's basically you go into a hall with 100 other people, and you're called up for different gradings. And you do it in front of a panel of instructors, chief instructors. There was a guy called Andy Sherry, who was the first European to get a black belt, and he was the chief senior course tutor. He's in the 70s. So very scary man. And you had to do it in front of him. And it was basically, you had the kata, which are a set. It's like a dance, really, a set or movements. And you had your basics, your punches, kicks, blocks, etc. And then you had sparring as well. So it was 3 different elements to any grading. So passed that one anyway, and then that was really enough for me. I was quite happy. I achieved what I wanted to achieve on it, and Terry said, no, you got to keep going, go for second dan. So second dan was really a lot harder. It was harder to get that than it was to get the black belt. You only one more belt to go through, but it was just, and I failed it miserably as well the first time and had to repeat it again. And you can't do it for a year. Well, if you fail, you've got to wait a year before you can get the chance to do it again. And I did that one in Dublin, and I got second dan. And then once I got that, I was really pleased, because it was really quite an achievement for me, because I never felt it was that good, but obviously I'd reached a certain standard with it, and I did really enjoy it. And obviously physically there's great benefits from it, and I got on very well with Terry. We're still good friends. But then COVID kicked in and all the clubs closed, and I had been training just sort of one-on-one with him, and we weren't allowed to do that anymore, so that kind of knocked it in the head for me, and I've never really got back to it, to be honest. And as one of my instructors said, a black belt's all very well, but if you're not training, it's only good for holding your trousers up. And that's totally true.
I'll tell you one thing though, I'm not messing with Mr. Morelli.
No.
I don't care if it's been a few years, I'm not risking it.
Well, you've both actually mentioned a fair amount of like other ways you've invested your time. Like you were talking about the gym before we started the interview, and the karate and riding motorcycles and that kind of thing. I have found, being an adult, very difficult to manage like hobbies and interests and things that I know are good for me.
And Mark only has 2 kids.
I have no kids. There's no reason I can't do these things. But how do you do that? How do you run a business and also make time for your interests?
You have to make time. You really do. It's very important. Ellen, the gym for Ellen is a relatively, you've fiddled a bit with the gym over the years, but it's good that you've a regular thing going on now, because that's Ellen's space and Ellen's friends, and Ellen's, you know, sits and has a coffee with the guys afterwards, and that's her thing, and I, you know, don't really get involved in that. Same with me. I've always played golf. I've always ridden bikes. The karate's kind of come and gone a bit now, but I took up cold water swimming a couple of years ago.
Great.
So I'm into year 3 of that now, and that for me works very well because I go into work really early. I go in about 6:30 in the morning, and I can get an hour or 2 hours work done in that time, and you can get a lot done at that time in the morning because there's only myself and a couple of other people there. So get paperwork sorted out, and you know, get checking up done from the day before. And then I head down to the beach and we all meet at 8 o'clock. And it started off with a couple of friends of mine, a guy called Michael Moss, who was an guy who was in charge of Portstewart Golf Club, and Philip Parker, who's an architect friend of mine. And they started it, and then 3 or 4 of us joined, and then it was 4, now it's 24.
Class.
So we have a big group, all ages, all shapes, all sizes, all backgrounds. You know, it all goes out the window when you're in the water. What's in the water stays in the water. And we've become a really tight-knit group of friends, very interesting people. We meet every morning, winter, summer, rain, hail or shine. 8 o'clock, we stand around, have a chat. Sometimes people bring food, and like it was my birthday on Saturday, for example, and they all turned up with a bottle of Prosecco and sausage rolls and everything, and had a bit of a party before we went in for a swim, and it's just a quick dip. But I can do all that and be back in work again at 9 o'clock. Having done that, showered, changed, back to work again. I've done 2 hours work already, so it's amazing. If you make slots in your day, that just happens to work for me. Like if they swam at 9 o'clock, it wouldn't work for me. So, you know, you have to find that window in your life, or that time in your life, and say, right, I'm going to take up that. The swimming has been amazing, both for physically and mentally. It's superb, but it's very social for me. It's all about the group. You know, occasionally if I miss a swim for whatever reason, I'll go down and go in on my own in the afternoon, but it's not the same. Yeah. A, it's dangerous, and B, you know, it's just not the same. So you need your friends there to, and we don't stay in for very long. This time of the year, this is actually the coolest time that it gets, is March. So the water's somewhere between 7 and 8 degrees now. So it's Baltic.
I love the cold water. I love the cold and I love the hot. Do a lot of sauna, do a lot of ice stuff. And I totally agree with you. Sense community, clarity, mental, physical. You're not the same person if you don't do it. Yeah. I heard I was swimming where I was at Killyleigh near Downpatrick, and there was this like 80-year-old and 85-year-old woman that jumped in beside me, and I was like, hello, like what the heck's going on here? And they're giving me all this like old timer wisdom about like swimming, and they give me this great wee tip, and it says, son, whatever degree it is, that's how many minutes you should stay in. Yeah. And I was like, I'll never forget that as long as I live.
It's totally true.
So smart.
We would be in for 5 or 6 minutes at the minute. That's all you really want to do. Yeah. And that's another thing about that. When you are experienced in it, you don't mind if you're not feeling it that particular day, then you just don't stay in as long, and nobody says anything. That's fine. You know, some days you're the first in, last out. But you know, it doesn't always work that way. So you have to be. And it's better in a group because it is safer. You know, it can be dangerous, you know, unless you know what you're doing. So, and there's a lot of currents in Portstewart. So you've perfected your in and out. You're not getting your feet too sandy. Change really quickly. Do you use a dry robe? What do you do? Dry robe, yeah. Got a friend of mine, Angela, who's a dry robe man. They supply them in Northern Ireland. She's based in Bangor. So most of our group use her stuff, Cozy Mac. So yeah, but you bring your bottles of water, and you bring your flask of hot chocolate, and you wash your feet before you get into the car so it doesn't get all sandy. And yeah, it's a bit of a, you know, I have a very set routine, and then of course, so come back and, you know, just hot shower afterwards, and that's it. So you do feel great after it. Now, to be fair, it's something I can't ever see myself stopping. Yeah. Because age is no limit there. So, you know, as long as you can walk into the water, you'll be golfing and dunking till you drop. Hopefully. How did you end up singing on Broadway, Ellen?
Oh, right. Let me think about that one now. Right, as a friend of ours, he actually does some work on Today Radio by phone from the States. He's a Fox News man. Great. And long story cut short, we met him in Portstewart because he bought an apartment there. By dint of his marriage, his late wife had a friend from Northern Ireland, bought an apartment above the shop.
He's the first one to buy one.
And he was the first one to buy one off plan, Cal Thomas, lovely man. And Yeah, so when he was back in Washington and then doing a Fox News program, I think weekly from New York, he
Yeah.
had said, "Come whenever you're in New York, call me and we'll do this, that, and the other." And we did. And so he said, "Come and watch me this day. I'm going to be doing a piece live to camera in the studio." Billy Graham's son, he was going to interview him. And it was, so we were in the background, it was lights, camera, and we were nipping each other.
Jessica and Sienna were there too, the girls
No,
were
not
there as
that
well.
point. It was our first New York one.
Oh,
that
right,
was
okay.
it.
I thought
Yeah.
It's only the first time, Damian.
Only the first.
You know, out of the multiple times, come on.
Well, but Cal was so kind. It was the first of the twice we went. So we thought this was fantastic, and it was around Christmas, and Cal would have loved the whole Broadway thing. So at the end of the interview, they wheeled on a big birthday cake for him, and it was she didn't jump out of the cake, but a Broadway star pushed the cake on, and then lo and behold, they all stood round this baby grand piano and pulled up us as well. We all started singing these Christmas. Of course, we didn't know the words, and we were like laughing. And I thought, what is actually happening here?
Doing your best lip sync, trying to join in.
Yeah.
that.
And so that was that.
That was that.
Class. You're the first people I've ever met that have actually won something on a TV game show as well.
Yeah, that wasn't yesterday either. That was
Before
we
it
were
was
married there.
No, it would have been, we were married in 89.
Mid 80s it would have been.
It would have been
86, 87, something like that, I guess.
no, I don't think we were married the following anyway.
Anyway,
Famous her
it was,
memory. Yes, it was Trick or Treat.
Trick
It
or
was
Treat.
Mike Smith and Julian
Yeah.
Clary.
That was his big break. That was his first TV show.
Julian Clary.
And the premise of the show was that you had to be asked a skill testing question, which I think you still do in quiz shows to this day. But if you got that right, you won a prize, and then you were able to trade your prize for a hidden prize.
Oh.
And you kind of traded up or lost it altogether. But they give you a little hint. They tell you what are you interested in. And I'd say, well, I like motor racing. They say, well, we might ask you a question about motor racing and who won the world championship. Da 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 da. So you were you had a bit of a heads up, I guess. But it was a really good experience because they met the guys. The production company met Ellen on the plane when she was flying for British Midland, and she was having fun with them. And they said, "Oh, you guys should come on to the show, and we'll set an audition up for you." So they flew us and put us up in a hotel in Mayfair in London.
Great.
And we did this audition, and sure enough, we got on. So then they fly you over, all expenses paid, and you do the show, which is filmed with a studio audience. So it was very good. And Julian Clary was, obviously being very Julian and very camp and great fun. And we ended up winning this 2-week sailing holiday to Turkey.
Fabulous.
Again, all expenses paid. I mean, it was worth thousands, and that was at the time. I mean, it was really
Sure.
a high-end trip for us. And I remember when we got the dates, and I thought, oh no, it's Northwest 200 weekend. I'm not going to be able to go. I said to Dad, sorry, I'm going anyway. So you're going to have to cover us somehow. So off we headed to Turkey, and we had a fabulous holiday there in Marmaris.
Marvelous, yeah. that's
Unbelievable.
So it was quite an experience. We've never been able to find it. I'm sure it's out there on social media somewhere.
It was island
So if-
sailing.
the
the
trick or treat thing,
yes,
the show.
Where was it?
Damien.
Was it ITV, BBC? It was no idea.
ITV.
Yeah.
I don't ever want to see it.
Move your
One of your guys.
Yeah, you're good.
I'm sure one of your techie people will be able to find it.
Yeah, well,
hard enough.
that's what I'm trying to think. If it's ITV, what was it called? Trick or Treat?
Trick or treat.
Oh, please, no.
ITV, Trick or Treat.
I'd love to see it again.
No, because we were young and
Yeah.
it would depress me now.
It was a great experience. I mean, it was very
At that age
interesting.
as well,
Yeah,
like before
yeah.
getting married and all, like what a treat.
Yeah, so that we actually were on the boat, this yacht and everything in May, and got married in September. So it was a big year, and I was just walking in air. It was fantastic.
great.
Yeah.
That's great. A couple more questions, then we'll kind of land the plane, as it were. What is your favourite thing off the Morelli's menu?
Oh, right. That's a good question, but I kind of know
Everything?
everything.
Foods, ice
Everything is
cream.
excellent.
Our breakfasts are really popular, and I know why. Because my favourite thing would be the Ulster fry We do a very good Ulster fry, and we're lucky enough occasionally to stay in maybe in a nice hotel in Dublin with big heavy silver teapots and beautiful white linen and a lovely fry. And I'll say, Damian, ours is better.
So
Ours is better.
This is news to me. I did
What?
not know Morelli sold fries.
Oh, we do lot on my
I'm a
breakfast.
day trip guy. Like I'm
Yeah.
usually there at like 3 p.m. So I missed that. Interesting.
It's a difficulty, and it's something that Francesca is working on for us, because not only do we do breakfasts, we do pizzas, and we do a full hot food menu.
No idea you did pizza.
We're licensed. You can
What?
you can have a pint of beer in Morelli's if you wish.
Oh, now you've got Mark interested.
Yeah, we've Peroni on draft.
Peroni on
And
draft.
we sell wine,
Wow.
and then we do obviously all our pastries and coffees and ice cream. So the perception sometimes in Northern Ireland is that you're either a cafe or a restaurant or a bar.
Sure.
You know, we're kind of all of those things.
Yeah.
And so, yes, but essentially we're known for ice cream, and we have changed our business model several times over the years. And in fact, recently we decided that we would consult our own staff and say, look, what do you think? How do you think we should set things up in terms of our opening hours, in terms of our menu offerings, and any other ideas? Because, as my brother wisely said, you know, before you start trying to figure all this stuff out, you need to talk to them and see what they want to do, because they're the people who are front and center, who know what's going on.
Yeah.
So we, a friend of mine who does those sorts of business consultations, hosted a meeting, and all the staff went to it, and that was one of the things that they had said, that you need to set your opening hours up, because we were constantly changing them, and people didn't know whether they were coming or going. It is difficult to get chefs, and there is a cost involved in that in terms of all the gas and whatever. So I started analysing the sales and things, and it turned out that we were doing 60 to 70% of our hot food sales before 3 o'clock.
Wow.
You know, it's mostly breakfast and lunch, but we were running right through to 8 o'clock at night. So we decided to cut that out. So we just do hot food now from 9 to 5 every day, which encompasses all. And of all that stuff that we do, breakfast is 70 or 80% of that.
Oh, that's
Because
incredible.
the Ulster fry is our most popular item on the menu, and we do a really good breakfast. So Saturday and Sunday mornings particularly are very busy for breakfast. You get lots of bikers coming up, and people coming in who are holiday homes and stuff, come in with their
Hen
friends for
weekends.
breakfast, and younger people who've been out the night before and come in ready for
The cure.
the cure. So we do a lot of food, but we decided that we would do 9 to 5 for food and then concentrate on the ice cream. So we've really got now upped our game in terms of our toppings and all that sort of stuff, which is the ice cream. The whole profile of ice cream is changing now. It used to be your traditional sundaes and knickerbocker glories and that sort of thing, and whilst we still do that, it's all about crepes and waffles and sauces and inclusions, as they're called. So we've got 16 different toppings on the go
You're
now.
nodding heavily.
Yeah,
I've just seen a lot of that here.
yeah.
The
So
Christmas markets, you walk around, it's just the most
Yeah.
complicated ice cream I've ever seen in my life.
yeah, it is. But it's amazing.
Is that to do with because people are sharing it visually on their social feeds? do you think?
That's a big element of that.
visual,
Yeah, and
yeah.
we needed to find a way to display them in the shop as well, because obviously when kids see them, I want that. It's
Yeah.
easy, they can point to it. So we've got these big Perspex tubes which have got all our fillings, and they're all sitting on the counter now, so it's easy for kids or the younger people to come in. They can just point and see what they want.
Nice.
So yeah, so really for us, if people think about Morelli's, you think about ice cream, then we need to capitalise on that and focus on that. So that's our sort of mantra for this year. And also another thing we discovered when we were analysing our sales is that the takeaway out of everything that we do is almost 40% of all our sales is just takeout. So that's a big critical part, where sometimes that can be seen because of the shape of our counter. Our takeaway's at the front and the counter runs up the length of the shop, but sometimes the takeaway can be seen as a bit of an afterthought, and sometimes people can be standing there and nobody's serving them. So now we're saying, look, that's a priority. You always must have somebody up there.
It's really interesting.
So in terms of my favourite thing, chocolate brownie ice cream, hot caramel sauce, and milk chocolate buttons.
The Mr.
Asian
Morelli
Morelli
special.
Winner.
Damien is 5.
Damien's a black belt. You're lucky you're married to him. I couldn't say that to Damien. So what's your best selling ice cream?
Vanilla.
Still vanilla.
Wow.
Yeah, still
Good
vanilla.
old faithful. Don't knock it.
Our Northern Ireland people are traditional.
Yeah.
They're very vanilla. Is that what you're
They
saying?
Yeah.
No, they are traditional, and they like what they know, and they know what they like.
Yeah.
End of.
Awesome.
And you can have 100 flavours, but they'll go, I want that one. It's vanilla.
Honeycomb, closely followed by honeycomb. But yeah, vanilla will still be the main
Interesting. Who's the most famous person that's come to Morelli's?
Well,
a good
Annika
question.
Rice, do you remember, came in?
Yeah, Annika Rice was one of
Maybe
them.
before your time, Annika
I
Rice.
don't know who Annika Rice is.
Right, okay.
I'm sorry.
You're also
I'm
5.
going to Google it.
Yeah,
I am actually 5.
she did sort of weird travel programs where she was jumping in and out of helicopters and stuff like that, but she was very big
What a
back in
legend.
the day. And we've had lots of Northern Ireland celebrities, and we've had local rugby players in and all the motorbike guys.
And Jimmy Nesbitt.
Jimmy Nesbitt will be a regular. David Moyes has been in several times. I think his mum or dad are from Portrush. So people like that, people that you would know in Northern Ireland. I'm not
That
recalling.
travel writer was in recently. Is it called?
Pete Postlethwaite, if you remember him, actor.
Great name.
Yeah, Usual
Great actor.
Suspects. Yeah, he's great. He was in one day. So yeah, you do get people that sometimes you can miss
Chris
people.
Rhea was in, and
Chris
Rhea
Rhea was in,
shop.
yeah.
Now
Awesome.
tell me you know Chris Rhea.
I have no idea who that is.
Driving Home for Christmas.
Oh, I know that. Oh, yeah, I know that.
Trying to find, and you know who was it? Well, I'm trying to get to your generation now. You know Scarlett, the girl Scarlett, who does did all the social media stuff. She's a TV presenter now.
The Geordie girl. She was in Geordie Shore.
No, she wasn't Geordie Shore.
We do.
That's
I don't
how
know why I asked
she
this
started.
Was
question.
it?
We don't know
Okay.
anybody.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
One of the questions we often ask.
Nick Hure. Countdown.
I know I've heard of
Again,
Countdown. I've heard of
My favourite
Countdown.
programme.
It's a good program.
I love it.
I used to watch it with my granny.
Thank you.
Carol Vorderman.
Time to go.
Was that the
Yes,
Maz woman?
yeah, I love her
Amazing.
books.
Amazing.
She
What are
loves
her books?
She writes books, and it's about the origin of words.
Oh,
Very good.
that is interesting. Is Countdown still going?
Yeah, it was the very first program ever on Channel 4.
The first one.
Very first one at 4:30 on a Monday. When the very first day Channel 4 started, and it's still on the go.
Incredible.
And I sometimes watch it and repeat. I
If
love
it's
it. I
broke,
love it.
don't fix it. Absolutely.
I like words.
If you could take anyone from Northern Ireland, dead or alive, out for a Morelli's breakfast, who would you take and why?
Alive or dead?
Yep.
Probably George Best.
Awesome.
Just because he was just the best.
Say
Still
no
the
more.
best, in my opinion. But
Can I take Elvis?
You can, yeah.
Okay.
You can.
He'd have everything to eat.
Yeah.
it had to be from Northern Ireland.
Oh, from Northern
Oh, I
Ireland.
thought you said Jelvis. Do you know who Jelvis is?
No.
Oh, I'll send you a video after this.
Oh, I'm a bit curious about the video. Oh, from Northern Ireland. Oh dear. No, you've got me. I'd have to think about that.
It's fine.
May Blood, maybe. I know she's now dead, but very interesting.
I love May Blood.
Yeah,
She's
character.
great.
Yeah.
We had May on the show.
Did you?
Yeah, so that's one of my favorite things about doing this is it's a little tiny snapshot of a moment in history,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I just love when May passed away there fairly recently, loads of people pouring out messages just like, look, we listened to this, we hadn't heard this before, and it's lovely that you can kind of allow a story to keep going
Yeah,
in some
and
small way.
She had a story and
She had a great story. Great
yeah.
book as well.
Have to read it.
I think it's called Watch My Lips, I'm Speaking, something like that. And it's all about her life and everything that she was involved in. So yeah, you would enjoy that. You like to read, don't you?
I do.
Yeah, it's great. I see you, you were talking about social media strategy early for Morelli's. I just think you should do a live podcast with some of your patrons because you'd be good at it. Wee moments of
Mortified.
sitting at the table asking them about their life. You'd be good at that. Not for you?
Wouldn't be a lot of work
Suggest
done.
that.
There's even less work done.
You're like, Damian, I'm just driving business. That's what it is.
Well, you know, that's the thing too about Morelli's. Our unique selling point is that our name's above the door and we're there. And quite often my son Nino's there, and sometimes Sienna, she's just in full-time work of late, but she would be there as well. So there's maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 Morelli's just working away in the shop.
Sure.
And you don't get that anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember actually a guy coming into the shop, and he was. I served him at the counter, and he was a big burly guy, and he said, "Do you want to see my Morelli's tattoo?" I went, "Oh, I'd love that."
Recently.
Quite recently, and so he pulled up his arm, and he has a North Coast arm.
Wow.
So it has Barry's, and then it has big Morelli's right in the middle of it all.
Oh, believe
And it has the white rocks and all those sort of stuff.
And a
all of it was
99.
yeah, and a big 99 right the way down his whole arm.
Incredible.
Wow.
And he said to me, "Are there any Morelli's around?" And I started laughing because you were there. Francesca happened to be there. Nina was working, and my father was sitting up on the top. And I says, "There's 5 of us here at the minute now." And he was all pleased about that, you know. So yeah. So and then funny, somebody else met him on the beach, and he was showing them, I think, the Barry's one. They said, "Oh, is it Morelli's as well?" So he's a dedicated fan, which is great.
That's class.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about your little tattoo poking out on your wrist.
Yeah, I that's a bit of a midlife crisis, I guess, but that's the club that I was involved in with the martial arts thing. So, and that's a black belt. So I got that after I got my black belt.
It's not just for holding your trousers up.
It's not just for holding my trousers up. And it was just done around the corner, just off Botanic. It's a client of Francesca's, actually. I can't remember the name of the studio.
Can't remember.
He was a lovely guy anyway, so I got that done in there.
That's
You know,
awesome.
Terry Bradley's just started his own tattoo.
Yeah, so believe,
Wow.
yeah. So he's been under pressure to do that for a long time. So we would know Terry quite well. So that's good for him.
That's
Hope it
very
goes well for him.
Oh,
Yeah.
he's a nice artist.
He is. I should actually chat to him. He's on the list.
Mm.
Not all. I mean, family businesses don't always go on forever. Do you think it will make it to a 5th? Is there any interest among the Wayans?
In truth, I doubt it.
Sure.
Francesca would have been the likeliest candidate, but she has kind of other things to be doing at the moment, if that's the right way to put it. My argument to Francesca would be that she said, you know, I could run that, but I don't want to do it the same way that you do it. And I'd say, well, Francesca, you know, the world is littered with businesses like ours that don't survive because the owners aren't there. And her answer was, well, Richard Branson doesn't fly his own planes.
Good answer.
Which is a good answer.
Yeah.
And you can't really argue it. It was typical Francesca. You can't really argue with it.
Yeah.
So I said, look, it's something to think about. Obviously, we don't want to work forever either. But my other daughter, Sienna, I just don't think it's for her. She's IT. That's what she works in. She's living and working in Belfast now. And Nino really doesn't have the temperament for it. Nino's too laid back. He's too easygoing, which is, I envy him that trait of his personality. You know, you couldn't ruffle our Nino, and he's a musician. So he's a guitarist now. He's got a upcoming interview now in Leeds for the Conservatoire of Music up there. So hopefully, if he passes that, he'll be off to do a degree there for a year. He's already done a couple of years in the North Coast Regional College there. So yeah, it's not going to be for him either. So I don't really know, to answer your question.
Yeah.
It's up in the air, and
Time
obviously
will tell.
there will come a point where we'll have to say, right, well, you know, where do we go from here? Whether we put a manager in it or whatever. But I mean, I would like to think it'll continue on in some shape or form.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we've got one more question. Do you have anything else?
I'm good.
All right, this is the final question. We hit it with everybody.
Oh, God.
It's not that bad. You'll be all right. You've done very well so far, Ellen. I think you can do it. If you could go back in time, you can answer it separately to an 18-year-old version of yourself, and you had 90 seconds of an 18-year-old Damian or an 18-year-old Ellen's time. What sort of things would you say to them?
Run. Save yourself.
I don't think there's a lot I would change about myself on a personal level. Ellen probably disagree with that. I mean, I know I can be, you know, have my moments, but professionally, I think to take advice, which is something I didn't do, for several reasons, and sometimes to appreciate what you have and maximize what you have without looking elsewhere, because we've done several different ventures which maybe haven't worked out so well, not always in catering. So sometimes to get one thing that's going really well and stick to it is not a bad way to be. I know it depends on your ambitions. I remember thinking when I was that age, oh, I'm going to retire, I'm 50 and I'm going to be a gazillionaire and all the rest of it, and it just doesn't work out that way. So I would tell myself to manage my expectations a bit better and to listen to advice.
It's great. You want to add anything to your run, or are you going to...
I can't really, again, you've really caught me on the hop. I agree with what you said. I think it's very insightful.
Let me throw you this. This will either help or hurt, right? Marriage advice for a young couple starting off.
Also run.
See above.
Also, yeah. Well, I think we've managed to do the working together thing okay. Well, more than okay, obviously. And we're both on the same page that way, and our difficulties are the same. And
I think it's good if you can share friends. If you have similar friends, that makes a big difference, because means you can socialize together, and you know, in a group like that. I think that's important. We've always done that, but we've always done our own thing as well. We've taken our own holidays apart from each other, and I think you got to give each other a bit of space, I guess, would be my take on it. But yeah, having mutual friends is a really good thing. The working together thing, you know, sometimes I think when people work in separate jobs, you know, if Ellen comes in at night and she'd been gone back to nursing, for example, and come in, she'd had a horrible day, and I'd had a horrible day at work. I don't really want to hear about her day.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Whereas when we work together, she knows why I've had a horrible day. If that's because we both can, you know, you're facing the same problems. So when you work together, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And this place is big enough that we're not actually working, you know,
on top of each
other. And then for several years, whenever the kids were smaller, Ellen spent her summers in Italy as well, which we were very keen to do, because we want them to understand their heritage and learn a bit of the language and spend time with their grandfather and all of the above. So Ellen would have, you know, it's not going to happen this year, by the way.
No, I understand that. No, the other thing is we both give each other freedom, and I think that's a personality thing. It's not necessarily the way we have made ourselves be. It's just the way we are, and it's not to be needy. And I would never say to Damian, "Well, no, you're not doing that," and I want you to do that, and don't you do that? And he would never say that to me.
Yeah, we're 34 years this year.
34 years, wow.
Yeah, so we both give each other space to do our own thing, and it would have to be something pretty serious if I would say, no, that's ridiculous, don't do that.
Yeah.
You know, I let him, you know, he's growing up, and you can't tell another adult what to do.
There you go. What a place to end. Damian, Ellen, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
Look, thank you so much once again for checking out this episode. Big thanks to NI Connections once again for making it possible. And like I said at the top of the show, if you would like to sign up for their free email newsletter at niconnections.com, I highly recommend doing that. Their website is a great place if you're thinking about moving to Northern Ireland, whether it's for the first time or you're moving back home after being away for a few years. On the website is where you can also find up to, I'm going to say it's like 30 plus episodes we've done over the last 3 to 4 years of really, really interesting people from Northern Ireland who are doing really interesting things around the world. NI Connections exists to make those connections all around the world for people like you. And so if you're in business or you're just interested, I was going to use the word nosy, but I'll say interested in seeing what people from this part of the world have gone on to do, I highly recommend going over to their website, niconnections.com. And thank you so much for being here. Big thanks to the Morelli's once again. And a big thanks to producer Mark for making this episode so fun and look so great with all the cameras. Cheers. Have a great time. If it's your first time listening, bestofbelfast.org is our website. You can check out over 300 interviews. Man, that is crazy to say. 300 interviews with interesting people from Northern Ireland who are just making this place a better place. So yeah, have a great rest of your day. And thanks so much once again for watching or listening. Cheers.